Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. So today, obviously, we've got predictions coming up, my 5 for the upcoming week of college football, but since I've already looked at the AP poll, I got a little creative. So through these first really technically 3 weeks, but also really kind of 2, we're going to look at the hottest hot seats in the country, my top 5 hottest hot seats. Obviously, that can't include Scott Frost anymore because he just got released not too long ago. But we're going to look at the coaches who better step it up or they could be looking for their next venture. Before we get into any of that, go ahead and subscribe for me. It helps me out a ton. Doesn't cost you anything to do. So with the coaching situation right now, a lot of teams have started off on the wrong foot, but also within a lot of these teams, especially the ranked ones, you've got a lot of stability at head coach that really isn't being questioned. So I wanted to go through all of college football right now and pick out my 5 primary candidates to be fired if the season ended today. The first one I felt was the most obvious. It was the easiest name to get to, especially after I saw some reports that had come out regarding his current situation. I'm talking about Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. And while, yes, he is a giant fish and this guy that has a national championship, one of very few that are still active coaches that can say that, I think that this last game against Appalachian State showed a lot of issues within the team and how they're moving forward. And I think that if he doesn't get it figured out and start to get back on track this year, he could be out. Those are reports I had mentioned earlier. Let's touch on those a little bit. So it seems that Jimbo could have to give up play calling duties if the team struggle continues. That's something that was brought up. I believe I saw it on ESPN. So there's already at least people looking at it and being like, okay, we've got to figure out changes here. And it seems to start with what Jimbo is doing within the program, or at least during game days. So if he is asked to step down from play calling, and they've got a pretty tough opponent that we'll talk about here in a little bit when we get into predictions, but if he is asked to step down from play calling duties, if the team fixes themselves after that, it'll be fine. But if they still can't get on track, because it, at the end of the day, is still his roster, he is still in charge of growing and improving these young men, if they can't figure it out, he's probably going to be gone. Texas A&M can't handle the fact that they have so much NIL money. They can bring in these giant recruits, but the guy who's in the building just can't seem to really figure it out. So recruiting is great. Being able to use your NIL money is great, but wins matter so much more. I mean, an infinite amount more than literally anything else in college football. If you can't bring home the wins, then you're not going to stick around. It's great that you can get the number 1 recruiting class in the country. Do something with it. I don't know that A&M will have the patience to let him see it through until those kids are juniors. Right now they're just freshmen. If he can't start to, show some signs of improvement and really kind of defend and justify that, I believe it was the number 6 ranking on the preseason AP poll. If he can't start showing why they were ranked that high and why they're projected to be that good of a team, they'll find somebody else who can. So the next coach I want to talk about, definitely less of a big fish, unfortunately. At least, he just doesn't have Jimbo's reputation currently. Maybe yet is the correct way to say that. But Karl Dorrell at Colorado, he's got to figure it out soon. He just got, manhandled by Air Force, which, yeah, I get the triple option is confusing and wacky and a weird thing to have to deal with, but you can't lose by that grand of a scale when you're supposed to be a Power 5 school and it's a group of 5. Upsets happen, close games maybe, but you can't be in a powerhouse conference and lose like that. Final score was 41-10, and I think they had over 500 yards on the ground or something insane. Colorado got just handled. They had no control over that game whatsoever, and Karl Dorrell is not showing a lot of signs of strength within that program. They have already started 0-2, and all he's doing is going backwards from what he's done in years past. He's currently on track to continue doing that. Last year he was 4-8. That really doesn't cut it. You've got to improve. An 0-2 start definitely isn't cutting it. And now you're staring down the road and you see Minnesota and you see UCLA on the direct horizon. I don't think that Colorado will come out of their first 4-game stretch any better than 0-4. And right now, 0-4 could end up being the grounds to say, you know what, you got to get out of here. So Carl Durrell is number 2. And they're not just super duper in order. I don't think Jimbo Fisher is the most likely to get fired. It would probably actually be this next guy I'm going to talk about. But these are just the coaches that I think have the 5 hottest hot seats in some variation or order. It's just the group of guys. You can kind of decipher how you think they should be ranked amongst yourself. But the next guy I want to talk about, and who I probably would have put at number 1 if I was ranking them on least to most likely, or most to least, he's the most likely to be fired in my mind, Neil Brown at West Virginia. He was actually on my list for the coaches that had the hottest hot seats entering the season, and known to start at West Virginia has not changed that one bit. You lose your opener, a close game, to a ranked team in Pittsburgh. That's fine. You know, you can't fire a coach for having I believe it was 37-30 if memory serves. You can't really get on him too much for that, because at the end of the day, Pitt is supposed to be better than you, and you got really close there. What you can get mad about is a 13-point loss to the Kansas Jayhawks. If you're losing to Kansas in football, usually not great, and I've got another similar point about another team later on down the road. But yeah, you can't be losing to Kansas, especially when your job is hanging on by a thread. And Neil Brown, like I said, one of my candidates on the hot seat to start the year. He's remaining firm in that position. He's 17-20 right now at West Virginia, which does not sound just awful. You know, it could be a situation where it's like, oh, he needs more time. But he's never gone above 500 in the conference, and he's only got one season above 500 in that fell in between 2 losing years. It's just not working out right now. And I don't know that Neil Brown, maybe he just wasn't ready for this kind of jump. Like, the roster's good. It seems like more of a competition issue than it does him personally. He just can't quite figure out how to make it work. And maybe, you know, he goes back, something I had mentioned whenever I talked about Neil Brown preseason, maybe he does go back to a group of 5, figures it out again, really develops a little bit more, and then goes on to, you know, move back into the Power 5 and, you know, has a little bit more traction. But for now, I would assume that the West Virginia job is just about open, or at least is pretty close to it. So that is number 3. Let's talk about number 4. We go to the ACC for the next one. And initially, entering the season, I hadn't really thought about Louisville much as a team, period. But Scott Satterfield has made me think about them for the wrong reasons, because they're coming off of a pretty ugly loss. I believe it was to open their year against Syracuse. That's another one of those teams that if you have to say that you lost to them in football, it doesn't quite sound right. And that's no disrespect to Dino Babers or that program as a whole. Just historically speaking, or recent history, they haven't been all that formidable on the gridiron. Louisville managed to lose to them, and it's kind of incredible because they beat UCF 20-14, I think. And UCF is known as a good football program. So it's strange. It's kind of counterbalancing it, and losing to Syracuse will ultimately be more memorable, especially by a wider margin like they did lose to them, than it will be to remember a closer win against UCF. Louisville was 8-5 in Satterfield's first year. They're 11-15 since then, and are 0-1 in bowl games since then. They've only obviously played in one, and it's been 2 seasons. But you know, you're not really showing a lot of post-season success. You've split. You're on 50% right now with making bowl games to not after that 8-5 season with another person's roster. It doesn't really look particularly great. Plus, looking down the road again, they've got a scary schedule up ahead. You're looking at Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, Clemson, NC State, and Kentucky. Those are 5 currently ranked teams that are on their schedule for the remainder of the year, plus Florida State, and you've got West Virginia. So, you know, not West Virginia, but Virginia. Virginia does not look horrible right now. They're struggling a little bit, but Brennan Armstrong is a talented enough quarterback that if he has a good day, it's going to be a hard game to play against. So they've got a really tough road ahead of them. Satterfield has been moving backwards since he's been at Louisville. Obviously has not caught back up to that 8-5 start. I don't think it's going to start going very well. The ACC is kind of in a point right now. They're in a bit of a holding pattern, so that part doesn't really threaten him as much. But with Louisville not really showing much improvement under Satterfield, I could see them moving in a new direction. So the last coach, I really personally don't think will be fired, but it's worth noting because his team is off to a historically bad start. His tenure at this school is unprecedentedly bad to this point. We're talking about Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, and if you were to, just scroll on Twitter and get into the Notre Dame corner of things, you would see Marcus Freeman would think he's going to get fired tomorrow, and he's only through 3 games, but still, you can't be 0-3 at Notre Dame through 3 games. That's just not how this works. He's 0-3 if you include last year's bowl game against Oklahoma State, which was his closest game to this point. But to lose to Marshall, what's the excuse there? You know what I mean? Like, how do you get around that? Because I can't mentally get past that. That's not really something that is working very well for me whenever I sit here and think about it. It's like, I personally am a Marcus Freeman guy. I think he's going to work out if you give him enough time. I get the criticism, and I get why fans are angry, because you can't start off 0-2 in a season or 0-3. You've already mathematically eliminated yourself from the college football playoff, and you've only played 2 games this year. Like, that's not how this works. Plus, you've got Tyler Buckner, who's out for the year, so now you're having to move with Drew Pine. Nothing really feels like it's going right for Notre Dame. And, if this continues to spiral and everybody starts losing faith in South Bend in Marcus Freeman, it's not entirely out of the question for them to move on and try to go get a Luke Fickell or, somebody who they know has success at the head coaching position. So that concludes my top 5 coaches that are on the hot seat right now. That'll obviously change. Maybe I'll update this every few weeks just to kind of keep you in the loop, maybe bring some new names to the forefront to really focus on, because I don't want to sit here and have to talk about Neil Brown, 4 times in the year. At the end of the day, I would like to keep it mixed up. So if that's something you guys like, me talking about the potential hot seat head coaches, feel free to let me know in the comments. But we move on now to something we're a bit more familiar with. We've got my predictions for the upcoming week. We've got one prediction of somebody getting crushed because I know how bad it doesn't work out for me, but I'm going to keep doing it. And this week it was kind of a layup, but we don't start with that. That'll probably actually be the last one I talk about. What we will start with is BYU versus Oregon. I think that BYU is going to go into that game and they're going to get their 2nd ranked win in as many weeks and continue to climb the AP poll. Oregon, they have the home field advantage. The line favors them by 3.5, but they also got exposed pretty bad against UGA. Like, yeah, sure, it's great that you can put up 70 points against Eastern Washington, but I'm not focusing on that whatsoever, because whenever you did have to play a really stout team, you got just handled. Like, it wasn't even close. I think BYU is a lot closer to Georgia than they are Eastern Washington, and while, yes, that is just about the complete opposite end of the scale there, BYU is a real team. They're a tough team to beat, and last week proved that against Baylor. They go in there, it was an ugly game, they came out victorious, they beat a top 10 team, and now they've got the chance against Oregon. I think that all of last week, really all that will do for BYU, is motivate them and prove to them that they can knock off these typically huge teams. And Oregon is another one of those. And they know that Oregon is not the strongest team in the world based on that game against Georgia. So you go in and you really bring all that energy that helped you coast, or not really coast, but helped you get that win against Baylor. And I think it just keeps on rolling for BYU. The next game I want to talk about is actually one of the games that I'm most excited to watch in college football this week. It's Penn State versus Auburn, because last year it was a very exciting matchup, and this year you've got the potential for another really close game, but the trick is I don't really think this game is nearly as close as some people are making it out to be. Having home field advantage helps Auburn a little bit, but Penn State has a better football team by a pretty comfortable margin. They're more bought in, it appears. I'm still not really sold that Auburn's talent roster is particularly great. I think that the trust level around Brian Harsin, while going up, is still not where you want it to be following everything that happened last year. And Penn State, when you think about it, they've already kind of got a bit of a tune-up version of this because a lot of what people are drumming in is how loud Jordan Hare gets. But Purdue is not an easy place to win. It's a difficult environment to go in and try to succeed. Granted, again, it's not Jordan Hare, but it's a nice experience ahead of Jordan Hare because you're getting used to the noise and the atmosphere. It's almost like the practice before the game. They got to go in there, they won that game, and now it's time for the big one. Penn State is yet to put up less than 35 points this year. Yeah, it's through 2 games, but still, I'm going to take them to continue that streak. Final score prediction, and I don't like to do this very often, but I'm going to go 38-21 for Penn State. I think that offense ends up kind of, I don't want to say carrying them, but I like how their offense operates. I'm not just the biggest Sean Clifford guy, but I think that they've got a good balance going on right now, and I think that Penn State comes out of this and continues to move up the AP poll. The next game I want to look at is NC State and Texas Tech. I think that this week will be kind of similar to what we had last week against App State, except for NC State is more prepared for Texas Tech to come in there and be, a real team that could really cause them some issues, but they're still not, supposed to be to that level, even though they just beat number 25 in the country last week. I don't think that Texas Tech will be getting the same level of respect that they probably should coming into this game. I think that's going to be a mistake. They took down Houston last week. NC State almost dropped the ball with ECU. While it almost does not count, they did win that game. They did not look good winning that game. Donovan Smith, the quarterback for Texas Tech, he's not afraid to let it fly. While it did result in 3 interceptions for him last week, it also pushed out 350 yards. I'm willing to risk it. I think that being able to push the ball, especially against a team like North Carolina State, and really trying to get them on their heels is the key to making them uncomfortable, because we've seen how they play when they're uncomfortable. They're not a particularly resilient team. At least this portion in the season, we have not seen that. Plus, I think NC State's offense has also remained pretty underwhelming. So if you can really hit the Wolfpack early and make sure that the Texas Tech offense is hitting on all cylinders and you're finding your groove, you're going to force them to be uncomfortable and trying to push the ball, which could create issues, could create some mistakes that at the end of the day, I'm not really sure NC State is prepared to bounce back for. The Wolfpack are favored by 10 right now. I think Texas Tech covers that, and they make another ranked team sweat it out and, really cause them some issues, for the second time this season that we've seen for North Carolina State. So the next game I want to look at is one of, I think, the only maybe ranked versus ranked games this week. Miami versus Texas A&M. I think it is BYU Oregon, and then Miami versus A&M. I think those are the only two. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Miami comes into this game and they have a pretty definitive showing against A&M, and they managed to put them away. I think Texas A&M is going to get themselves eliminated from the college football playoffs this week. We talked about Jimbo Fisher earlier, and if he's already eliminated from the college football playoffs by week 3, I think that absolutely helps solidify why I'm saying he's on the hot seat right now. I don't really think it needs a whole lot more solidification based on what we saw from last week, but another loss absolutely hurts it, even if it is against a ranked Miami team. You have to start watching out for if he potentially needs to be replaced. App State beat them on the ground, which is a big point of emphasis for me because that's really what Miami's strength has been to this point is their rush game. I know they haven't played particularly great teams or great defenses, but their running game has been truly hard to stop. It's still collegiate, high-level athletes that are out there trying to stop them, and they can't do it. My main worry here is that Devon Achane is going to be a problem because we really don't know what Miami's defense is going to be yet, but based on their offensive strength, I'm still going to take Miami. I think maybe this is the week Tyler Van Dyke kind of steps out and starts to perform really well. He's been fine. He hasn't been anything just stellar yet, but we know he can be really, really good. I think maybe this is that week just because of who they're having to go up against, and you need multiple layers to your offense for that to work. That said, I'm still taking Miami one way or the other. Now we're finally into my who's going to crush who game, and I could have done Miami A&M, even though I didn't feel like either one of them were going to get crushed, I don't really feel like BYU is going to crush Oregon. I think they'll win fairly convincingly, but Nebraska and Oklahoma are playing this week, so I guess Oklahoma is going to crush Nebraska. It feels a little bit layup-y to me, but the line is only a 10-point favorite towards Oklahoma, which weirds me out. 10 or 11, I can't really remember right now, but it's fairly minimal, and I think you could double that up, and I would still take Oklahoma to cover this game. Nebraska, they've just got way too much going on right now. You know what I mean? Like, there's way too much mentally to fight through in this game. And while OU is a good team, I don't think that they're of the nation's elite. But I think that they're pretty decisively better than Nebraska, especially whenever you have to factor in new head coach and going through all these changes in the week leading up to this game, a very big game on their schedule, one of the larger opponents they'll have all year. It feels pretty easy to just go ahead and lob that one in there and say that's the game that I think will be really one-sided. So what are your predictions for week 3, or who are your top head coaching candidates that you believe are on the hot seat? Better yet, who do you think will be one of the first head coaches to fill in one of these positions? I'd love to hear some predictions to look back on and either be like, wow, I don't know how they figured that one out, or, make fun of you a little bit. But for now, that is episode 33 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.